Ebony Janice, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Welcome.
Hi, it's good to see you.
Good to see you. Looking very seated and rested in your seat. See, I be learning, girl. I be taking notes when you talk. I be like, it's been a week for grappling with a lot of concepts, as you just heard there, and it seems to me that if we skip the part about what this all signifies, about how this society devalues feminine energy, then we've missed a real opportunity. What are your thoughts, reactions to hearing that video, to just sort of taking in everything that's happened this week with relation to everything that you've listened to us talk about this far? How are you, and what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, you're right. I am in my seat. I just am always taking a deep breath and just trying to find a way to always speak and respond from the highest possible version of myself.
Mm.
And one of the things that came to me as Holy Ghost had me preparing for this sermon today was actually the story of Oshun drying up the water. Oshun is an Orisha in the Ifa, the Yoruba pantheon faith. And basically, what happened is Olodumare sent several Orisha to build the earth, and everybody doing what they do, but they weren't being respectful to Oshun, who is the only woman or female Orisha and also the youngest. And so Oshun decided to just take the water away, just dry up all the water on the earth. And so the rest of the Orisha are like, trying to use their tools and trying to build stuff, and nothing is working. So Olodumare asked them, "What's wrong? Why isn't anything working?" And they were like, "We don't understand." And then he asked the question, "Did you include Oshun?" And they say no. And so Olodumare says, "Then nothing you do can succeed. You have rejected sweetness, creation, and the source of life itself." And so when I think about the fact that that is what the world system is still to this day operating on, operating under the guise that it can build something that will work properly. It can build something that can function and serve properly without actually blessing the divine feminine, blessing this the sweetness that Oshun brings to earth, blessing the goodness that women, that non-toxic masculine, identified people and beings bring to the earth. It will never survive. And so my first thought is to continue to bring this message, particularly for Black women, because I'm always going to center Black women in any conversation that's thinking about women, particularly for Black women, to divest, to dry up the water, to dry up the water. I have thoughts about what that will look like for us. I shared them in the past. I'll continue to share my thoughts about what drying up the water looks like. But at the same time that I'm suggesting this for us, I'm also calling in Black men and or people who love Black women to listen to the fact that Black women historically have been at the forefront of making the right choice for all parties involved, and the data shows it. This is not my opinion. The data shows that the way that we vote, the way that we organize, the way that we shift, the way that we resist, the way that we create. Our dear beloved Martin Luther King didn't even have a dream before a Black woman preached that sermon about having a dream. So even our eldest and our most revered leaders were actually following in the full footsteps of the divine feminine, goddess Orisha spirit, guided by Black women. So that you don't have to suffer from the consequence of Black women drying up the water. That's my
Not much
introduction.
drying up
Hi.
them waters now. You don't want a crusty earth. You don't want an ashy earth. You want an earth that's moisturized. You want an earth that's well hydrated. And you'd mentioned that Oshun was the only feminine Orisha. Is that she was the only feminine Orisha that was sent for the task of building the earth, or is she the only
Yes.
feminine
No,
Orisha
she's not the only female Orisha, but she was the only one that was sent at the time during this, particular story. She was the only one that was sent. So there are like five other, masculine Orisha there, but she was the only one. And she didn't even start trying to fight with them, even though Oshun is known to be extremely powerful. She could have probably started and waged a war and, fought the other Orisha that were there, despite being the youngest and the only feminine. But she decided to just withdraw and let them see what will happen. And I am actually both suggesting that we do withdraw, all. But I also believe that in a lot of ways, this patriarchal world system that exists is the manifestation of not paying attention to the divine feminine. This won't work. That's the reason why this isn't working. That's the reason why no one is benefiting from this. Even the people who think they benefit from a patriarchal system. We've talked about this before, Lurie, even the people, even the men in particular, even the black men in particular, who think that the $2,000, or who think that, they were not suggesting that they weren't going to listen to Kamala, even, that you think that you benefit in some way from having access to patriarchal power. Meanwhile, that is just not the way that this violent, white supremacist, ableist, patriarchal system is set up, that it will not benefit anybody, any of us in the long run.
That's right. That's right. You used the phrase divine feminine. For people who are hearing that phrase for the first time, what does it mean to have what is divine feminine, and what does it mean? What would it look like if the divine feminine were being respected as I think it should be?
It really is about balance. I think that in contemporary defining of it, it can be really whitewashed, and you see a lot of the girls, particularly white women, talking about the divine feminine, tapping into this idea where they're like laying on a lily pad and just kind of resting, and that's the only thing they're doing. And what they're really doing is co-opting language that they haven't really tapped into, because the divine feminine is not about weakness. Softness is not about weakness. This being seated in our bodies is not about weakness. It's about the balance of understanding that while Ogun, while the tools, the spears, while those who go out and build with hammers and knives, that is necessary. That there also is not an opposing, but a balancing, that then you have to come back and rest, and you have to come back, and in that rest you get to create, and you get to imagine, and you get to dream, and you get to soften, and you get to be nourished, and you get to be replenished. So my own introduction, or the way that I introduced the conversation of this so-called divine feminine, is really about this idea that God has asked us to be in balance, that there be moderation in everything. So this is the divine part for me. And the feminine aspect of for me is not about women specifically. It is about the fact that we all have both. We have the both, and we have to be able to be in the balance of all things. And we as a society have leaned so far into this masculine go, 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 hustle, hustle, hustle. Capitalism really speaks to that. There's no time for rest. There's no time for imagination. There's no time for dreaming. And because there is no time for all of those things, there's also no time for us to really sit back and think about, well, what do we do? Where do we go from here? When you think about all movements for justice, in fact, because we haven't been tapping into the divine feminine really for the last several years, which is so unfortunate, because Black feminist scholars have really suggested that we do so. When Alice Walker presented the term womanism, she said, not a separatist except periodically for times of health. She's talking about Black women have never historically been separatists. We have always been thinking about, voting for, creating movements towards being collective, being inclusive, being ensuring that all people are well. So not a separatist except periodically for times of health. Every now and then we have to either go away by ourselves as individuals or as a group and say, let's figure out where we go from here. Audre Lorde, very similar, Black feminist scholar who introduced the language of the erotic as power. She was not talking about doing the booty or humping or sex. She was talking about being able to tap into our joy, our pleasure centers, knowing that we create so much more profound movement for ourselves as people and for the world when we're coming from a place of pleasure and dreaming and seatedness. Toni Morrison, who revealed to us so much about softness. It isn't particularly language that she used, but she absolutely revealed to us so much about softness that she could talk about really hard, heavy things like race and intersectionality, and not even necessarily have to use that language, but do it from her deeply seated self. That's the language that me and Lurie are using. I was talking about being in your seat. It's when you take a deep exhale in that place that you're in your seat right there. What if you could create and imagine and talk about these really hard things from that place versus from, being nuck and ready to buck 24/7. It's literally killing us. And so this is what I'm offering, this idea of the divine feminine. Our elders in these, Black feminist and womanist movements have been suggesting to us for years that there is something profound that we get to do, and we get to imagine, and we get to create from there. But we are just so in this hard, toxic masculine patriarchal white supremacist ideals as the only way that we can pursue justice, that we don't know that if you would sit down somewhere
Mm.
and then we can figure out where we go from here. But we haven't had a break in a several hundred years.
Yeah. I so appreciate everything that you just said. Whenever we do, I've been talking a lot with my audience about the Sankofa circles concept
Hmm.
that my husband and comrades and I have come up with and have been honing in and providing for the past 2 decades now. But at the beginning of every Sankofa circle, pretty much at the beginning of everything I do in terms of Sankofa, we start with a libation. And because when I was taught about libation, I was taught that there's nothing that you can do designed to heal our people that should not incorporate the ancestors. And so libation was a tool that was introduced to me in my 20s. And one of the things that I always include in my phraseology of a libation is that we pour water for the balance between masculine and feminine energy, not between men and women. We pour
Hmm.
water for a balance between masculine and feminine energy, the foundation of which is the foundation of any healthy society, people, nation, or race. And I frame it that way because recognizing that we all carry elements of masculine and feminine within us, and it's easier, I think, for many people in our society to say, yeah, women got masculine and feminine in them, but I don't know. I'm a brother. I'm a man. I
Right,
don't
right.
have no feminine in me. And I will never forget watching a video. And actually, I'm now regretting that I did not send the video to Amina to hold. Although I be sending Amina 5011 videos all day, every day. And there's so many videos we have never gotten to that Amina be like, all right, I'm going to add it to the wall. But there is a video of brothers having a conversation, and one brother's talking about how grateful he is to have been able to tap into his feminine energy, how it has allowed him to be able to receive. He didn't use this language, but basically softness in his life. Like he likes being able to cuddle. He likes being able to tap into the part. And he's a heterosexual man. He's talking with a big old bass in his voice, so he's looking very stereotypical, like one of them boys. And not, oh, sorry, that means police. I meant like one of them corner boys. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Very stereotypical um, exhibition of masculinity. But he was talking about how grateful he was to have been introduced to the fact that no, as a man identified person, he also has feminine energy within him. And then he was like, he was talking to his friends. He was like, dog, you don't want to be led by inner wisdom. You don't want to be like able to
Yes.
tap into like a sense of inner peace. And you don't, and he was basically like, how you living without tapping into your feminine energy? And the rest of the brothers was like, I ain't got no feminine in me. He's like, that's your problem. You ain't tapped into your inner feminine. And I think that when we can normalize this idea that we carry both of those poles, those you might want to call them opposites in some spaces. I don't necessarily think that's the right language. English sort of fails me in this moment. But for me, the balance is yes between masculine and feminine, but all of the manifestations of that sort of energy that even go beyond those two paradigms. And I think that we have been taught to create such animosity, especially for men who would exhibit what we identify as feminine energy, that it has helped to reaffirm that the only energy that we as a nation, as a society can tap into is patriarchal masculine energy. And that is why you will change the name to from the name of what was it, Department of Homeland Security to the Department of War or whatever. That's why you will have people who lead with an aggression that is unchecked, that is unbalanced, and where every solution is gotta go to war. I need a bigger penis, rocket ship to aim at somebody. There seems to me a real, it's a trap that people seem to be stuck in, and it's a trap that I think could end up with humanity ending its existence in this experiment known as our time on planet Earth.
For sure. Thank you for bringing up specifically the language of inner intuition, because that is it. This is the reason why I talk about leaning into our rest and our softness, and taking a break and in our seatedness, and, maybe even drying up the water for a little bit to just be quiet for a while. Because what happens when you are quiet? You get to hear your actual thoughts more. There
Mm.
have been, I'm a Capricorn, and so I love it, a detail in specific. I love an example. Don't just give me this concept. Give me an example. I was telling a story about how several years ago I was launching this bodysuit. It didn't even exist. I had made like a proof version of it from some Walmart products that I bought. So, but it says, "What would Erica Badu do?" This is probably about 6, 7 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And what would Erica Badu? And I woke up in the middle of the night, and I had like thousands of orders. It was so terrifying. I didn't know what happened.
Wow.
And Erica Badu had reposted it. And so all these people are now ordering this bodysuit. So now I'm in panic mode because it doesn't even exist. Now I gotta go and actually make this thing. So I order the things, I do the things, and Lurie, every single one I make, the letters are peeling off. So now I'm in a panic, like, they gonna think it's a scam. What's gonna happen? What am I gonna do? And so something tells me, something, somebody. Now, we have different language for what that something is. If you are a Christian, you might say the Holy Ghost. It's like a lot of different language that we tend to use for it. But I like to
I'll
just say,
cause you to say that in the Trinity, the Holy Ghost is the feminine energy. Argue with your mom. Don't
and
argue
it
with me.
and we don't have to argue about that because in the text, if you study the text, the language actually is feminine. The way that and we know this from language, if a word ends in a certain letter, it could be determined as masculine or feminine. It actually is a feminine. So again, deal with that in your own time. But so there's something said, go take a nap in the midst of a crisis. Go take a nap. So I go lay down, and as I'm falling asleep, I see myself making these bodysuits, putting the bodysuit on the heat press, putting the design on, pulling the lever down, and I see myself turning the heat up, and I fall into my nap. I wake up and I think to myself, oh, I saw myself turning the heat up. Mind you, I'm doing exactly what the instructions from a person told me to do, but I decided to do that. I turned the heat up. It worked. It's exactly what I needed to do. I got that information from taking a break, leaving the problem, not trying to just, oh, I'm gonna force it, I'm gonna hold it down longer, I'm gonna do da 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 da, I'm gonna just make this work. It's not working.
My
Take a
God.
break. So this is what happens in the divine feminine when we get to actually be both with the force of the actual work is the masculine. Sometimes that is I put the thing here, I go like this, I pull
External
it down. That's the
exertion.
doing,
Yes.
that's the
Yes.
motion. But actually it would not have been prosperous. It would have never worked if I wasn't able to actually also go and get some information from the divine feminine. So, what happens in a society where you're never listening to women? Whole other level. What happens in a society when you're never listening to Black women? It's so
Hmm.
it's really, and again, I'm going to always go back to what happens in a society where you're never listening to Black women, because again, we have trended from before the suffrage movement. We have trended from before, abolition. We have trended inside the house and in the field as Black women having done very heavy labor of guiding both spiritually, both in the divine feminine and in the sacred masculine, guiding us in the direction that we go. And that is not just my opinion. That is well documented. That is historical. That is accurate. That is factual. And so, really being able to tap into the balance of understanding that, we need to be doing, for sure, we need to be doing the work, but we need a shift in what the work looks like, which means that we need to tap into the divine feminine. And I don't want to take the conversation in its direction, but when you brought up the brother talking about, how brothers often are like, I ain't got no feminine, I ain't got no feminine. And I think that's what's wrong with our relationships with each other.
Girl. I can't wait to. I know Amina's reaching out to you so we can do some podcast episodes for the holiday. I cannot wait. I cannot wait. But here's why I'm really bugged out right now. Ebony Janice, every day on this show, I do a segment called Moment of Gratitude.
Hmm.
Today, and because we do very heavy topics and conversation on this show, and so I want to make sure that the audience is rooted in a sense of joy and gratitude and appreciation before we do the heavy analysis, which is a very intentional segment. It is a very divine feminine segment because you cannot do the heavy analysis of figuring out what am I going to do, how am I going to do it, and how am I going to exert the energy if your emotional state and your spirit soul are not in alignment. So y'all have been participating in this without knowing it. But today's moment of gratitude, we played a clip from Jenny Clark, who was talking about stillness and how the power for us is in being still, and how we have been convinced that the power, it really comes when we hustle harder, grind harder. How much can I do? How much can I make happen? What, I'm going to wrestle it down. I'm going to make this thing happen, which is it's not to say that men are, what can I do? How can I do? But the masculine energy,
Yeah.
and regardless of what cosmology you're looking at, whether it's ancient Chinese cosmology, when you're looking at African-centered cosmology, the exertion function is considered a masculine function. The receptive function is often depicted as a feminine function. And so literally the entire moment of gratitude this morning was about being still this weekend and listening to the inner voice. So the fact that you said that, this is how I know there are no coincidences. This is how I know that like we are in alignment and doing what is necessary. But we have got to figure out what it means to create a way for us to grapple with what the divine feminine looks like, both for us as individuals and for us as a grouping of people within this society. You had mentioned earlier drying up the waters as something that
Mhm.
Oshun engaged in. What does that look like societally speaking?
Yeah. The we've been troubling now for a year the language of the 92%. And this 92% has overall, because there are many different demographics of Black women inside this 92%. So we're not all a monolith. But the 92% has represented the 92% of people who voted for not Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the 92% of people who voted for not Trump was Black women who have, for the last several elections, aired really far into this high percentage of making what I believe is the right choice, while a larger demographic of other people have made not that choice. And even in 2008, even if I just don't just talk about the 92%, but I do want to focus on the 92%. But even in 2008, I think the statistics was like 68%, which was the largest percentage of people who voted for not, you know, that right. And so I'm trying to bring these numbers in to show historically the data has shown how Black women by and large are voting towards the best interest of all people, and seeing it not just as a Democrat, Republican kind of conversation, but really as, hey, everybody, this is a bad idea. Let's just make a slightly different choice than this. So, with that, the 92% kind of in November of 2024 said, you know what? Get somebody else to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That ultimately the way that we have been really championing everybody and everything to the extent that we are wearing ourselves out, that maybe we should be doing that a little different. I happen to have published a little book in 2023 called All the Black Girls Are Activists, a fourth wave womanist pursuit of dreams as radical resistance, where I basically suggested that for several chapters, that we think about what would it look like if Black women were just to show up as our highest selves, to pursue our wellness, to pursue our softness, to pursue our dreaming, to pursue our ancestors, to pursue our authority, to pursue our bodies, really to be in pursuit of these ideals that would make us get us closer to our actual sovereign selves. And so when the 92% really kind of came to this language of get somebody else to do it, I was like, yeah, I agree. I have been thinking this for a while, through with theory and ethic and praxis. And so this idea then of drying up the water, I want to make this connection to the 92%. The 92% still voted in this election. We're still voting in primaries. We're still using our voice, through the vote. So never were we saying that we're not doing anything. What we were actually saying is, I'm out here in my little plot of land in North Carolina growing tomatoes and cilantro and sweet potatoes. And you could
Mm-hmm.
not possibly believe that that meant that I was the only one eating those tomatoes or those sweet potatoes or that cilantro. You couldn't either personally or historically believe that Black women said, get somebody else to do it. We're focusing on ourselves. And there was no way that other people weren't going to benefit from it. My neighbor up the hill
Right.
got a bunch of cilantro. My mama around the corner got the tomatoes and sweet potatoes in excess, right? Like there are all these ways that even as I decided to dry up the water, that I was still making sure to take care of the least of these, the marginalized, still being in community, still sending to the group chat, hey, make sure you sign up for this. The government is actually about to shut this program down completely. Make sure that you get this before it's last minute. We're still using our group chats. We're still using our email threads. We're still, women who, what's the win with Black women, which have been in existence since like 2019 and just didn't come out of nowhere when Kamala decided to run for office. It seemed like it because so many people came to know about it, but they have been meeting weekly for about 5 years at that point. And so they're still meeting, right? There's still these organizations that Black women are being led by, that we are ultimately not saying we are not showing up for the purpose of pursuing justice and pursuing freedom, but we understand that we probably should fall back and catch our breath. We probably should be taking care of ourselves. We probably should be being more intentional about our rest. We probably should be being more intentional about, our dreaming and our ease. We probably should be imagining what is on the other side. We talked about this probably 2 segments ago, so maybe a couple months ago, the last time I was here, about thinking about what's on the other side of democracy, considering we seem to be in the failing stages of the possibility of democracy, because democracy is a group project and you cannot vote in a group project with people who are evil, with people who will see the reports from these Epstein files and still, while they may not change their feelings about racism, they probably won't even change their feelings about Donald Trump because he's done enough already for them to have finally got it right. But they will just find other ways to be racist and violent, and so we cannot keep trying to do the same things. The drying up the water means stop fighting and resisting that, trying to force it with this masculine energy, and to fall back and say, okay, well, let's make sure that because we know that we are going to survive this, our ancestral stories reveal to us that we always come out on the other side. We create really beautiful things from triumph. Let's make sure that we get on the other side intact, with our bodies intact, our minds intact, our spirit intact, our health intact, our wisdom intact.